Recently I watched District B13 again. For this video, however, I wanted to focus in on one specific aspect, the introduction of the two main characters. I found it kind of interesting because they are fairly back-to-back intros. I mean, close enough. They both feature an interesting main character and a great action sequence. Yet the first one pulls you into the film, and the other reminds you that you are in fact watching a film.
As your script progresses, you'll probably need to describe less, both because we've probably already seen a lot of these locations, and then also because you want your story to move fast, right? So as you go further along in the screenplay, you'll probably spend less time establishing locations than you did at the very beginning when you were trying to establish the world and create that world in our minds so that we could live in it for the duration of your story.
To be fair, they both are actually solidly entertaining. Of course, the parkour chase scene is a little bit more fresh and exciting than the more standardised gun-wielding kung fu cop, but they're both fine scenes for what they are. Oh, and by the way, I guess by now I should probably have said that Leto's introduction is the one that I am saying is the superior setup. But why is that? Well, for a start, we have to think about what an introduction should be. In fairness, Leto's intro does come first, and perhaps that makes it a little bit of an unfair comparison as it sets the pace of the narrative. But if that's the case, then the scenes that follow should also be a continuation of what came before. Leto's introduction does so much more than simply having a cool chase scene. For one, we see the juxtaposition of Leto's morals in this world. It shows that despite living in a world of crime, he still has the heart to stop it, or at least to be actively fighting against it. Quite recently I watched a series of interviews on YouTube with writer Chris Gore commenting on the state of cinema today. But in one of those specifically, he talks about a film's introductory scene, and I wanted to expand upon that, extending it further into a character's introduction as well, since in this film the beginning scene is kind of an umbrella for the introduction of our protagonist. It's a really great series of videos that I highly recommend, but I'll just skip to what's relevant here for now.
I would say that the biggest mistake that I see that a filmmaker will make in the first act is sort of a lack of world building to me. I would say that this probably applies more to genre pictures. World building is incredibly important to set up those rules, set up expectations, and defy those expectations. And if you have not established that, nothing in the rest of the film is going to work. So in that first act, world building, incredibly important.
So now when we look at District B13, what does it achieve in terms of world building in that first character intro? I'm going to ignore the opening text scroll, which is kind of redundant given that it's all explored in the rest of the movie anyway. But for a start, the world looks derelict, right? It's desolate and crime-ridden, dirty and with a heavy urban spin to it all. The building is a shitty looking flat, but as our friend mentions, it shows us that yes, they live in a crime-ridden society, since it is at all even worth pointing out that the building looks clean. But all these characters have the confidence of knowing that no police are going to show up. So having Leto's building be clean actually helps bolster not only the world building, but it helps bolster Leto's character as well. Now you have this person who is of substantial power that is still standing against authority. Okay, so now we also learn that power can mean owning territory. By the way, it's also important to note that what is happening right here is actually vital to the plot of the film. The stealing of drugs is a catalyst for the film's plot. It introduces the antagonist's henchman, well, K2 specifically, that we will be seeing later. And then if I'm to continue talking about the character, the parkour chase scene actually shows how Leto is both mentally and physically capable. Not only in the chase scene itself, but in the introduction we see him predominantly shirtless. This is not only to emphasise that there is no wire work, but it also showcases his physicality. In this chase scene, it always seems like Leto is 2 steps ahead of the guys chasing him. He knows the location, he was born there, like this is his domain. It also shows that these antagonists are serious too, that they are not worth being captured by and not worth stopping and fighting, showing that they might represent a power that is bigger than them alone. We also saw before with them luring the guards into a false sense of security, so we also learn that these bad guys can't be trusted and are pretty ruthless. And I guess that is pretty standard for a bad guy, but it also shows the character trait of Leto that he uses his mind and physicality over using guns. Having him being chased in the first place informs us that it's a big deal for the bad guys that he is actually caught. What are the consequences if they return empty-handed? Now we have a head villain that doesn't dabble in this kind of petty work. And that's interesting. It makes me wonder who the bad guy is. It paints a beautiful picture of who our lead is, as well as including events and characters that will be important to the narrative going forward. Now let's compare this with how Damien's introduction is handled. First of all, there is the 6 months later title card, which can be done right, but compared to this bombastic first 20 minutes we've just had, it kind of really stops the momentum dead in the water. The tone of this introduction is also completely different. The setting is unfamiliar, yet supposedly takes place in the same world. It feels at odds with what came before it. It seems that crime is still rampant, yet in this part of the city there is also so much more infrastructure. There is police presence for a start, but also a much more familiar and built-up looking urban landscape. This is an odd choice for a few reasons, but mainly because it fails to compare the rest of Paris to District B13. Sure, the buildings are nicer and police seem to care more, but we are introduced to an underground crime ring. It doesn't seem that different to a slum in the city versus a suburban neighbourhood. It would have made a little more sense thematically if you showed this area of Paris to be some kind of oasis, comparatively speaking. It also removes the image of the world that we have just seen, and it confuses us as to the rules of this place. Not only that, but it also changes the tone of the film. Damien is much more cocky than Leto. The levity is brought up, and he feels untouchable in his fights, so the severity of the introduction is also lost here. We never get the sense that things could go wrong. The characters are irrelevant to the plot, the location is irrelevant, and the action is irrelevant. We never see this guy, or this guy again. We never come to this place again, and we never reference this plot point again. It all feels a little bit redundant. I mean, hell, just off the top of my head, what about if Damien was one of the drivers of this truck that was carrying an unknown payload? Then, all of a sudden, he gets hijacked by hired police from the government. Payload gets taken off them, gets taken into District B13, and then the story doesn't really change. That doesn't affect the twist or anything at the end. But what it does do is it involves Damien in the narrative. His introduction is now more intimately connected with the story. So now when he wants to get Leto to help him, when he's trying to get the bomb back, it feels a little bit more personal for him, because he might even feel like he's responsible for losing the bomb. What it does is it makes Damien's introduction much more personal. It also includes him in the overall narrative of the film, because now he has personal stakes. I don't know, I'm not a writer. I'm just saying I think there would have been a better way to introduce his character, to have him included in the narrative. Because of the way that it stands, it halts everything. There's a time jump. You have this isolated incident that seems to have nothing to do with anything. Luckily, the film picks up a lot after Damien's intro. His character is expanded upon later and we get to enjoy the banter between the two throughout. I just think it's a poor way to introduce a character, as it stops time and simply tells you that someone is a good cop and physically capable. Things that we learn throughout the film anyway. Leto is the main character. His story is the emotional core, and his actions are what propel the story forward. As much as I enjoy Damien, he is actually the supporting character. And if they wanted him to be on an equal pegging with Leto, then either he should have had a more personal introduction, or his introduction should have been intertwined with Leto's. In that way, it wouldn't have felt so jarring and disconnected. But yeah, honestly, I'm not quite sure why I made this video. It seems incredibly niche and random, but yeah, recently I rewatched the film, and quite frankly, I just really enjoy the film, and Damien's intro has always stood out to me as a bit of a weaker aspect. But hey, it's still a great movie, and I thought this was a good case study into narrative structure and introductions. So I hope you could find something worthwhile here, but yeah, for now, have a good one.